Welcome to episode 20 of the Willpower podcast. My guest today is Austin Johnson. Austin is a software engineer here in Austin. His first success came when he started a company fresh out of college. And these days he is still working in engineering with some pursuits on the side. Today, we talk a lot about finances, taxes, the willpower involved in not needing a job, as well as some philosophy. Enjoy. What have you learned from entrepreneurship?
What have I learned from entrepreneurship? I've learned that we live in a very robust economy with opportunity lurking in countless niches. I think that there is tremendous gaps in need fulfillment throughout the economy. And a true entrepreneur is somebody that is constantly has their eyes open, looking for those gaps, looking for those pain points, looking for those areas where there is a need not being met, and attempts to meet that need in a profitable way. And I think that is the general force that has largely led the United States economy to be as wealthy and robust as it is. And that's a calling that is not necessarily suitable for everyone, but it is a noble calling and is something that certain types of people feel at home with. But I don't think that we're all called to be inventors, or we're all called to be, the people that are coming up with these mega billion-dollar ideas and changing the way that everyone lives. I think entrepreneurship can be much more of a connecting the dots style activity, applying modern technologies to older traditional practices style activity. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to find niches where you can connect the dots rather than trying to hit some mega billion-dollar home run by changing the way we're all using our phones or driving our cars. I think we live in a very, very complicated, robust, complex to the nth degree economy where there just are countless areas where needs aren't being met or are being met poorly. And those are where the opportunities of entrepreneurship arise.
So how did you start with it?
Well, I was graduating from college. I graduated in 2007. The great financial crisis hadn't yet hit. Job market was still reasonably okay. But I think that I was heavily influenced to take an entrepreneurial path because my dad was at like the tail end of his career, and I think he kind of felt himself being pushed out of his company at the time. And he was a computer science major, I think in the 60s. So he somewhat influenced me, like, own what you do. You don't want to take you want to accumulate real capital. You don't just want to have a W-2 career.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he was fortunate enough to kind of amass a fair amount of career capital, but I think he understood that he wanted his children to be able to amass a certain amount of wealth capital that would mean that they weren't dependent on W-2 income. Because there is, if you look into taxes, there is a pretty staunch disadvantage to the wage earner as compared to the capital owner. Like, it's just undeniable.
Yeah.
And it exists legally, and it's just an ancient precedent that exists, and it's probably not going to change anytime during our lifetime. So I think making that jump from you derive your cash flow from wages versus you derive your cash flow from capital is one of the hardest jumps to make, but it is like one of the best things that, you know, a family or an individual can accomplish. And so my dad largely made that jump, and so me and my siblings were always heavily influenced and oriented towards focus on capital ownership rather than maximizing your your career capital, maximizing your, you know, wage earning ability. So coming out of college, you know, I wasn't necessarily oriented just by the influences around me, wasn't necessarily oriented towards you know, going to graduate school or getting an MBA or anything like that. Like, I just got a bachelor's, and, you know, I was really, okay, the time is, you know, I view the best time to start a business is kind of when you have nothing to lose, like, you know, broke
Right.
college kid, like
No
you can just
family,
continue being a broke
no one
college kid.
depending on you.
Yeah, so your downside's very limited. Or, you know, you get to a stage in life where you have enough net worth built up that you can take a step back from W-2 wage earning and take some bigger risks, you know. So I view that as like the best time to start a business is either like age 22, when you're like educated, you know, reasonably knowledgeable, but still very wet behind the ears, but you're young and you're hungry and you got nothing to lose. Or so age 22, or maybe age 42, where hopefully you've built up a little bit of a nest egg. Maybe you have two wage earners, like you have a dual income family, and one person can have a more stable income while the other person can go be more entrepreneurial and take more risks and chase more upside. So when I was fresh out of college, I was very much oriented to, I need to just start a business, start any kind of business. Like, I don't want to get trapped in the corporate world. And I worked in a very large corporation while I was in college. Like, I interned and spent my summers working for Lockheed Martin. So like, I was like in kind of a mega corporation, and I saw that world, and that, you know, I loved my time there, but I knew that wasn't necessarily for me. But I did work for a company for exactly 1 year out of college, and I literally resigned on day 365 with this company. I was like, all right, that's good enough. I'm gonna try this. So I resigned exactly on the calendar year, and tried some pretty dumb ideas in hindsight. Are you familiar with Techstars? It's like it's like Y Combinator. Have you heard of Y Combinator?
Okay, yeah.
Techstars was like, came around the same time as Y Combinator, and I applied to the very first Techstars cohort with some stupid cell phone idea, and like, I got an interview with them, but of course I didn't get in. Like, but you know, I was just like, just try to make this work, and then eventually I was just like, okay, I just need to sell anything. And so that kind of brought me into e-commerce, where your barriers to entry are a bit lower, and was kind of able to stumble upon an agricultural niche, where by just essentially setting up some of the fundamentals of e-commerce correctly, I got enough organic search traffic that I was getting sales. Now, by no means could I go move out of my parents' house at the time. Like, this is all happening in my parents' house. But it was very thrilling and very exciting just to be like, oh, there's a chance I might be able to avoid the corporate track with e-commerce. And I remember at that time kind of thinking, what is $1 earned in a small business worth to me in comparison to what I would be earning as a wage earner? And, you know, I was obviously trying to reinforce my entrepreneurial direction, but I figured that ratio for me was about 1 to 50. Meaning, if I earned $1 in a small business, that was the equivalent of earning $50 in a job.
Explain that.
It's just kind of like making $1 as a small business owner, especially at a younger age, to me was just so thrilling, so exciting, because it represented like true potential. It represented upside. It represented a path where a wage is just a wage, you know. And yeah, I mean, a wage, you can do incredible things with a career in the United States. Like, you know, the sky's the limit. I think in largely any capacity. But to me, I was like, all right, if at the end of the month I have $100 in my bank account, what is that worth in terms of if I just earned this at a job? And I figured that ratio was about 1 to 50. I probably wouldn't agree with that today, but I
can see though, like
when I was a kid.
There's a different like emotional tie.
Yeah, exactly.
To business money, and there's like the fact that like I made this dollar, that means I'm gonna make more dollars. Like it means more. Whereas if you're getting paid a wage, you got paid for your time. Yeah, that transaction is over.
Yeah, and you'll get paid. Show up tomorrow, you'll get paid for your time again.
Yeah.
But making $1 as a small business owner, an entrepreneur in an entrepreneurial context is like, I'm onto something, you know? And I didn't necessarily wasn't making, I didn't make any kind of real money for several years, but I was just so thrilled to be making anything. and I knew that, you know, I could just keep my expenses next to nothing and continue down that path. So that's really what was the kick that nudged me over to, all right, you can figure out a way to make this work. Was just some initial traction with e-commerce.
Yeah. Did you have that like entrepreneurial itch when you were like younger? Like I had Avi on a few months ago, and he told me about when he was little, he would just like burn video games. Like he would like put them on the floppy disk and then sell them to his friends.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you had anything like that.
You know, I don't remember me doing any like of those like cool hustle things as a kid. Like I remember, you know, just like cool like, oh, you were selling candy bars at the lunch table kind of thing. No, I don't think I was ever that guy. I always had I would describe a keen awareness of money. You know, I remember like during the .com bubble, I was like, I want to start trading and stuff like that. Like I always had like an awareness of money, but no, I don't think I was ever like the elementary school hustler or anything like that.
Yeah.
I did have like a tech savvy at the time. So like while I didn't like, you know, like I always like would have burned CDs at school. They weren't necessarily like video games I'd sell, but I was like, yeah, I'll make you a CD, no problem. Here's my little mixtape, enjoy it. So I always enjoyed having a tech savvy. But no, I don't think I was ever like, I don't think I ever had like the hustler mentality when I was a kid.
Yeah, I did. I tried to do eBay. I tried to sell clothes on eBay. So I'd like go. This was in high school. I'd like go thrift shopping, or I would go to like Marshalls or like other like kind of discount type places and then see what I could find and then put it on eBay. And I never.
Did it work?
Like, it worked in the sense of like there was that potential, but I think overall I probably lost money in just like that I bought so much stuff that I didn't follow through on. Or didn't end up selling.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough too, because I think it's one thing if you can do, you know, buy for $1, sell for $2, but if you got to spend 5 hours to get that sale, like you gotta, and you know, there's all types of ancillary costs you can introduce to those models where it's like, yeah, you're not really making money, but it's cool.
No, that's the thing. It's like, it's a cool experience to go through, but definitely like with the time, for sure I was in the hole.
Yeah. I mean, I did like lemonade stands and stuff like that as a kid, but I think all kids do to a certain extent. But no, I wouldn't. There was one thing that I would consider somewhat novel, is, you know, MMORPGs, like World of Warcraft would be the most quintessential one. We're one of the earliest MMORPGs, meaning like you play a video game online with other people, and there's certain like real world trading that happens. Well, there was a game called Ultima Online, which is like, think ancient version of World of Warcraft. And I remember I would go mining, like swinging a pickaxe, mining for ore with like me and a couple buddies in game. And then we would, I think we'd sell the like mining raw materials, I think for real money, while playing a game. So that was like a very perhaps early form of, you know, I think what's common now.
Yeah.
But I do remember doing that in video games, like trying to accumulate resources and then convert that to real world wealth. But of course, I mean, that's not, maybe you're making 20 cents an hour when you're actually crunching those numbers.
Yeah. There were a few games like that. I think Clash of Clans. Me and my friends would play that in like middle school and early high school, and I know there were ways you could buy money, or like Madden Mobile.
Yeah. The idea of like doing something in a virtual world, getting something of value, and then profiting off that. I mean, that, like, as a kid, that was exciting. But no, it was. I mean, that never made any kind of actual money. But I do remember doing that and thinking, I mean, like, who wants to go in a video game and go mining? Like, that's like simulated work in a video game. But I tried it.
So what was the like successful business that you started?
So the business that allowed me to kind of like, okay, this is working, was I started a website that connected customers with poultry hatcheries. I realize that's a niche, and the one thing that I've found is that I do somewhat have a nose for niches. Like, I have found small little segments of economic activity where it's like, oh, well, if this exists, maybe my tech savvy can apply in here. So I started a website that basically people could place orders on, and those orders would be filled by hatcheries, poultry hatcheries. Generally, this would be in the sustainable or pasture-raised poultry space. So people would basically order live poultry, and they would connect with the hatchery to order from on a web platform that I had built. I got that to about, I think in my peak, I got that to about 1.6 million in revenue doing that, and had a small staff with me. So that was like my first like, there's enough money changing hands that I'm actually paying myself a salary and paying employees a salary. And then through that experience, which had numerous ups and downs, but ultimately I didn't have much of a competitive advantage. It was just something I had built and that served the customer's needs by just virtue of being front and center in Google. But through that experience, I was kind of able to get into this agricultural niche where I identified that there are generally family-ran hatchery businesses which are technologically underserved. So I then pivoted that approach to not just be a sales and marketing platform, but actually go work directly with some of these hatcheries and build them the software they need to operate their businesses efficiently. So after that initial success with an online marketing platform, I then went on to build a piece of software I call Hatchery Brain, which literally performs the forbidden task of counting chickens before they hatch. So that's gone on to help a lot of these old 4th, 5th generation hatcheries just scale up their businesses significantly, because they're not necessarily running on pen and paper, but are able to use more modern technological approaches. Chances are, if you had a crazy neighbor, or maybe you have chickens in your backyard, there's a reasonable chance that I had something to do with that. So that was the kind of trend and niche that I was able to build some technology for that created a degree of financial independence for me.
Yeah, I went to a bookstore in this small town, and they were still using pen and paper.
Yeah.
It was like, I was like, what? Like, he wrote down the book title that I bought and the price.
Yeah. And I mean, there's something to be said for those types of businesses that are able to be competitive and thrive without necessarily, we need an app for everything. Mm-hmm. But I do think you will hit a limit in how much you can scale if you aren't using technological best practices.
Yeah, there was also, this was in a small town in Wisconsin, so like there's it was probably the only bookstore in the town,
Yeah.
and probably easy enough to keep up with in that way.
Yeah.
How do you, like you said you have a nose for niches.
hmm
What do you think that is? Where do you find them?
I think that as I've grown and just have a general curiosity and thirst for information, primarily through reading, you come across little clues that, oh, if this exists, that means somebody's making bank doing only this. Especially in like the financial world, but in many spaces, you start to realize, oh, just given the economic reality, there's probably somebody that does only task X in this process, and everyone uses this person,
Mm-hmm.
and they make bank, or they own a niche, or there's a small industry that satisfies only this niche, and so I've somewhat tuned myself to look for those because I think that's where you get started, right? That's in even if you're doing something dumb, even if it's like you're never going to make more than I don't know 50,000 a year. Going after said niche, it's still okay because it'll get you a beachhead into a space that you can then expand upon strategically. So I guess I've always looked for those clues. One of the things I've been doing recently is studying taxes extensively. I have a habit, I guess, of reading textbooks, and I recently finished a couple textbooks on economics, and studying economics. You obviously taxes would be a mentioned frequently, so I was like, okay, well let me study tax. Let me just learn everything I can about tax. But then it was like, well, there's accounting textbooks, but there's not really like straight up like this is how taxes work 101 style textbooks, at least not that I could find. And so I then discovered that there's a program that the IRS offers called becoming an enrolled agent, which is like the light version of a CPA, or like a backdoor to becoming a CPA kind of thing. So I started just studying taxes as much as I could, and just in reading tax code and reading tax material, which is super dry, but in just kind of like looking into taxes, I found, oh, well, there's a certain type of real estate transaction that has to involve this specific intermediary for it to be legal. If this if the tax code's written this way, then it must mean that there's a niche to be this specific intermediary, and there's a whole industry behind this intermediary existing in this specific type of real estate transaction. And looked into it, lo and behold, that whole industry exists. They're called 1031 exchange facilitators. And so, oh wow, look at this niche. Here's a whole niche that exists because of a certain way that the tax code is written. I wonder how they're doing. I wonder about the economics of their space. Where's the level of tech in their space? Are there any venture-backed efforts to modernize that space, or is this still done pen and paper like the bookstore in Wisconsin? So I guess that's the general thought process I've attempted to employ. And I think that's a wise thought process for anyone looking to, truly make an entrepreneurial effort, because you got to start with a laser focused attack on a specific spot of a market or an industry. You can't just say, all right, we're open for business, come one, come all. I sell everything and anything, like, the modern kind of like handyman service. I don't think that idea necessarily is going to get you far in a lot of entrepreneurial contexts.
Or trying to build like an end-to-end product.
Yeah, trying to do everything. Like, oh, we're going to build a
always
platform that, content creators use to do everything. It's like, yeah, well, good luck. That's a really tough thing to do. But if you can find one specific thing, like, I don't know what it'd be in the content creation space, but like,
like a piece of the process.
Yeah,
like
just a piece. That you got to start somewhere, and somewhere that you believe the competition level's low enough, and there's a small enough moat that you can actually get some initial traction to get excited. That doesn't mean that like, 10 years from now, all you're going to be doing is that specific piece. But if you get enough traction, then you can start strategically growing from there.
Yeah. And like if you can see those dollars, like that 1 to 50 thing.
Yeah. It's those dollars are very much oh, I'm on to something here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, no one's
Could
no
start
one
to feed you.
other than your, maybe your mom. You're not going to get any like initial customers that are interested in a charity. You've satisfied a niche. Like there's a niche that's, hey, I'm willing to take a shot based on how you've marketed yourself. So that's, I think, focusing on those niches that you wouldn't necessarily expect to exist, but maybe you research them a little bit and you're like, wow, there's whole niches out there. And maybe they have a conference, maybe they have a trade association. We live in an extremely robust economy. And I think that far too many would-be entrepreneurs, especially in the tech space, are too focused on, dating, video games, music. We're all focused on the kind of fun places to be, when it's kind of like, well, yeah, but if you do something that's unsexy, there's a much stronger chance that you're going to get that traction you need to really make this a wealth generator.
Yeah, it's the same as with like careers. Like if you pick the career that's like super fulfilling and
Yeah.
like everyone wants, typically the pay is lower.
Yeah. I have heard that. I have heard that, like, if you want to go work in Hollywood, right? Like, you don't make anything because
Yeah.
everyone wants to work in Hollywood. So you get a premium for working in the places fewer people are interested in.
Yeah.
And I think entrepreneurially that holds up as well.
It's the same thing. Or it's at least like it's just way harder. Because
Yeah.
like of course there are gonna be like the top dogs in the dating space that are making a ton of money.
Yeah.
But that's gonna be way harder.
Yeah.
Way more competitive.
Yeah, way more competitive. I mean, you can potentially succeed in that winner take all space, but my understanding is it's quite saturated, and it's not necessarily like, no one's out there being like, oh, if only there was another dating app. I would bang down the door of somebody that presented me with another dating app. But and this is coming from a guy that's I've used I'm married because of dating apps, so it's not like I'm frowning upon them, but it's just saying that, like, the obvious economic spaces, the obvious markets, especially the fun markets, are probably pretty well saturated, and you're not necessarily going to get that niche opportunity that I think can provide that initial traction necessary to make an entrepreneurial departure from the status quo.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you have an idea of like a general ballpark of, like, let's say you are working at a W-2 and you make X dollars versus if you were to create a product for a company and sell it to them. Do you know what the difference in the taxes would be?
Oh, like if you were basically, if you were a small business owner,
Yes.
making, how much more efficient is small business income than W-2 income? I mean, without, this would be a spreadsheet question, but just off the cuff, I'd probably say like 25 to 40% more efficient. I mean, the key advantages to being a small business owner, or to essentially having income derived through an entity that you own and control, you're able to deduct business expenses, which oftentimes will have carryover to personal expenses, even though a business expense needs to be ordinary and necessary for that business or trade. But being able to deduct business expenses against your income is huge, because then you're not paying taxes on those business expenses. There's a qualified business deduction that I believe is basically going to be 20% of your total self-employment income. So it's just kind of like you immediately get that much that you don't have to pay taxes on, QBI deduction. So I mean, that's super nice. Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question. I wish I knew off the top of my head, but if I were to guess, I'd probably say it's got to be between like 25 and 40%. And it depends on kind of how aggressive you are with the concept of business expenses. But
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's going to be more efficient, and there are ways to become very efficient with it, such as setting up as an S corporation, because now you would need to have enough cash flow where you pay yourself a reasonable salary, so you can have an S corporation that you pay yourself a reasonable salary. So then, it doesn't need to be anything crazy, but let's just say, you're doing, very basic software services, and so you might pay yourself a salary of $50,000 a year, and then but your business generates profit on top of that $50,000 a year. well, then that profit distribution is actually not going to be ordinary income. That profit, well, it would be taxed as ordinary income, but it wouldn't have Social Security and Medicare taken out of it. So you basically are able to kind of be have a wage as well as have income that's going to come from being a business owner, and so that has advantages to it. Because you're not paying Social Security and Medicare on essentially the profits that your business generates, as long as you're paying yourself a reasonable salary. So there's a number of advantages that exist for even someone that might be like a consultant or still very much billing hourly, but you just have a lot more flexibility and options when it comes to taxes in that regard. So yeah, I'd probably say 25 to 40% more efficient.
Interesting. Yeah, that is something to think about.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so let's talk about travel.
Okay.
So you mentioned that you lived in Mexico, for a period.
Yeah.
I'm curious what led you there and what that was like.
Yeah. So I was kind of like winding down certain aspects of my initial e-commerce operation, um, and wasn't going to basically pursue growth there anymore. And so I was kind of in a position of, well, do I want to? I was living in Denver at the time, and I had gotten married recently, and my wife and I had some student loans to take care of, so we like got ourselves to basically like positive but not very positive net worth, and we're like, all right, well, what do we do now? And we kind of had the option of buying just doing like, let's buy a house, let's just set up shop. We're in Denver, Colorado. Do we want to just set up shop here and kind of do the normal thing, or maybe we go have some adventures? My wife is from Mexico. She came to the US at age 12, so she's generally going to be more culturally American than she is Mexican. But for my in-laws, it's I need to be speaking Spanish, and that's the life I signed up for. So kind of like, all right, well, I need to actually get good at Spanish. Like, I need to immerse myself in Spanish and go beyond just like the high school Spanish class level ability. So we kind of said, well, let's just go spend 6 months in Mexico and just like live in an Airbnb or something and get immersed. We kind of were going down there with some degree of entrepreneurial thought. We specifically wanted to go to Guadalajara because we believed that we could perhaps manufacture furniture in Guadalajara, then import that into the US. So that was kind of like the story that brought us down there, which we pursued a little bit, but never anything serious. And then uh, so we kind of sold everything we owned in the U.S. and went down there with a few suitcases and got an Airbnb. And we're like, okay, well, let's get an apartment. Our money goes a lot further, and then we spent 6 months down there, and then kind of COVID came around, and we kind of were at the decision point of like, well, do we want to just go back and like socially isolate and like, I don't know, some random place in the US? We may as well do it down here. Like, we're already here. So that turned into a more extended period, and I think we ended up spending a little over 3.5 years down there. But it was kind of the key driver. I mean, at the end of the day, it was I needed to learn Spanish. Yeah, and I guess we both had remote incomes. I was starting to build some key software systems in the space that I was in. So that was allowing me to bill hourly and have a remote income as as I built software products. And then her job actually let her. I mean, she said to her employer in Denver, "Hey, I'm gonna go live abroad. Um, I'm happy to help out however I can remotely, but yeah, just know that I'm probably going to be resigning in the next few months." And they ended up just keeping her on board. So we actually got the whole like remote work thing kind of before that became the COVID norm. So we never really had like income concerns as digital nomads, which was fantastic. So that's ultimately what kind of caused that chain of events. But at the end of the day, why did we do it? I needed to learn Spanish so I could speak to my mis suegros, which is like mother-in-law and father-in-law.
That's funny. You know the Tim Ferriss book, The 4 Hour Work Week?
Yeah, yeah.
That was like the whole thing in that book was like how to. I mean, that was a big portion of it was like how to get a remote job or how to convince your boss to let you go remote.
The
And
must be
it's
the updated version of it. I think
no, this was the old version.
the older one.
Because now it's like, everybody has that already.
I actually, when I was very fresh out of college, I remember my mom told me to read that book, and I did read that book. And I remember doing the exercise in that book of going to Barnes and Noble. I don't know if that's still in the book, but at least one edition of the book said, go to Barnes and Noble, look at the magazines, and you'll see magazines for all these various niches, right? You'll see like, oh, there's crocheting, whatever there might be, a little hobby for model trains, bass fishing, just anything you can think of had a magazine at one point. And Tim Ferriss said, you want to go find how robust our economy is, go look at those magazines, especially like towards the back, and you'll see like, oh, I had no idea this even existed. I remember doing that exercise. I don't know that it led me to any like, oh, this is what I'm going to do next, but I thought it was a good thought exercise.
Yeah, it's a interesting book. It's very diverse in topics.
Yeah.
Like parts of it are like business, and then parts of it are like, oh, here's how you can enjoy your life more. And
yeah, which is critical. I mean, it's I think when I arrived in Mexico, I think I did reread the 4 Hour Work Week. Yeah, and just because it was always a book that I felt like prompts you to take risk and inspire change. It's just like one of those books that I think a lot of people have identified with. And at no point has my goal been only work 4 hours a week. Like, I kind of think that's I mean, surely just want to be lazy, I guess. But like, I mean, to me, the goal has never been don't work. It's just what type of work are you doing and who owns the upside.
Right. Do you have any other books that have really stuck out to you?
Other books that have really stuck out to me. Well, Cal Newport, Deep Work. Remember that one really stuck out with me because it kind of oriented me towards the mindset of you need to be doing highly focused mental work. Like, and I think that book kind of inspired me to like really take on, hey, I need to learn to code, right? I need to like really be able to execute things as a software developer. So Deep Work, yeah, and Cal Newport in general. So good they can't ignore you. Have you read that one? So good they
I think
can't.
that was his first like big book that he released.
Yeah, so good they can't ignore you. I remember kind of inspiring me to just take on the challenge of being so effective, so organized, so efficient at what you apply yourself to that the results are undeniable and you can essentially within reason name your price. So it's just like, hey, don't feel entitled to certain pay, a certain hourly rate just because of your background or because of your school. Like, you really gotta be making somebody else money for them to pay you big time. It's like, be so good at something that your results speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that kind of that inspired me to know that that's possible. Like, hey, you should make yourself worth $1 million a year to a company, and charge less than $1 million, and it's a no-brainer for them to pay you. But with technology, you can have that level of outsized impact. I mean, you can just be so focused and so devoted to a business process or a task or a niche or a market that you truly are just, you have that much of an economic impact. And so I like that sense of, it's so good they can't ignore you. And it was a long time ago I read it, but I remember it kind of just inspired me to like, be that guy, just let my results speak for themselves. Like, just focus on making other people money to the extent that they can't ignore what I'm doing for them.
Yeah. You're basically controlling what you can control in that
Yeah.
situation, and not like the focus isn't on like, oh, what am I going to get for that? Because
Yeah.
that is out of your control.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Just be that guy. Be that guy driving the value, and the results will come. You know. And so, yeah, Cal Newport's been. I've always liked his material. On the kind of on the less like hustle culture side of things, there's a few history books I've really liked. A few like finance and investing books that have been very powerful for me. That have kind of helped me orient myself towards the way money works, because I think it's like really easy to kind of fall into the just work endlessly, like be the first in last out person at the office, or just kind of like just be like, well, I'm working the hardest. But I think that can be a little bit of a trap, because I think it's easy to get one exploited if you're that guy, and two, you really need to understand the way money works and finance works to actually build real wealth in the US. Like, you know and so there was a book by there's a number of finance and investing books, but there's one that I always recommend to people that I think really speaks to some of these concepts well, called The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins, I believe. And that one's always stuck with me. It's just like kind of explaining compounding returns, opportunity costs, like you're not going to get wealthy off of maximizing your hourly rate. You're going to get wealthy off of your ability to have a delta between how much you're making and how much you're spending, and investing that delta, and then generating compounding returns off that. And just seeking compounding returns and asymmetric upside in what you do. I think entrepreneurially, you need to somewhat be aware of the world of finance, not more so than you would need to be in a traditional W-2 job, or even as a small business owner. Like, true wealth is generated from understanding the nature of money, not necessarily from, not all. I mean, like, if you're an NFL quarterback, you're going to be getting paid huge money, and yeah, you're going to be wealthy. But like, the simplest path to wealth is ultimately through generating capital, usually through business ownership or wage, and then investing that capital such that it achieves compounding returns. And it takes time, but it's an all but certain way to achieve wealth and financial independence. So,
right.
yeah, that's a book I always like to recommend. J.L. Collins, A Simple Path to Wealth.
It's like the dependable way, because you could be the superstar, like top of your industry, and just you make a ton of money, and that is just like a exception.
Yeah.
But if you were to look at people who, it's like if you're not the superstar but you're still good,
Yeah.
then you get nothing.
Yeah. And if you're not, if you're the best employee, like, you're still not really in a tax advantage situation. Like, it's hard to win at taxes when you're the best at something. If you're the one, it's hard to achieve wealth if you don't have any control over the financial capital.
Yeah. And I know there are so many stories of people who are like superstar earners,
Mm-hmm.
who are basically living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Just because they've kind of created that life that requires it.
It shocks me, man. I heard a story. I think it was just like a YouTube blurb yesterday about Adrian Peterson. Arguably the best running back of all time, other than perhaps like Barry Sanders or Eric Dickerson, but easily made over $100 million in his career, and he's having assets seized. And like, whatever the guy's going through, like, I'm sympathetic, but it's sad that, like, even at that scale, my guess is a combination of bad advice and mismanagement, and like just getting caught up in the wrong financial configurations can even take down something of that scale.
Yeah, that's rough. I did not know about that.
Yeah. I mean, it can happen at all degrees of wealth, and that's why I think it's so important to understand finance in general. Like,
right.
I remember I started an e-commerce business, and it was like, oh, I'm getting sales. But it wasn't until I really started being like, all right, what does my income statement actually look like? What does my balance sheet look like? You kind of had to like put on the CFO hat to truly get anywhere. And largely, a lot of my ability to sustain myself entrepreneurially has been more so due to money management ability than any sort of like everything I touch turns to gold, which it absolutely doesn't. But I've just had the ability to be mindful and aware of money to the extent that I've haven't gone broke. And so to me, that's one of the most important entrepreneurial skills, is just being financially capable.
Right.
And I come across people that are starting businesses or interested in starting businesses, and perhaps their personal financial lives are a wreck, or they're like, well, my accountant handles that. And it's just like, dude, money is what the name of the game. Like, you might consider yourself a product guy or a sales guy or an engineer, but like at the end of the day, if you're going to build wealth through entrepreneurship, you have to be a money guy. There are exceptions to that, but for me personally, like, you have to understand the financial mechanics of business, and I would argue taxes, to build any kind of significant wealth.
Yeah. Do you have recommendations for people to understand, like books, content, like anywhere that you found
Yeah,
information?
there was one book that really helped me as kind of like more on the consulting side of things, more on the like small business ownership side of things. I think it was called Profit First, and I don't have that author's name on the top of my head, but the book was called Profit First. But it kind of went through some like, look, you're wasting your time if you're not operating a business profitably and actually deriving taxable income from your small business activities. Like, and I think of it like, you're a software engineer. Like, you could go online and, you could go list, hey, I'll build apps for you for $5 an hour, right? And hey, you'd get orders like crazy,
A
like
bunch
people
of
would line
business.
up, people would beat your door down trying to get your services for $5 an hour. You would have no problem selling that. You could get the sales, but obviously that's not going to be profitable, right? It's just not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people fall into the trap of like, oh, we're getting all those sales, when essentially it's like, yeah, but what you're really doing is you're selling dollar bills for 90 cents. Like, you're kind of buying the sales. And especially in the small business space, I realize it's different in the venture space, but in the small business space, like, you have to be aggressively paying yourself first and ensuring that your entrepreneurial or business activities are generating a profit for you. And so Profit First is kind of a mechanism uh, to accomplish that at an accounting level. And I read that book, and it kind of, I mean, it's kind of like a business budgeting method. But I remember I read that book, and it was kind of like, oh, set up bank accounts like this, and keep an operating expenditure budget in one account and keep a profit account in another bank account, kind of thing. And I've been doing it for, I don't know, it's just normal for me now. I've been doing it for probably 8 years or so. But yeah, Profit First is a book that I think really kind of hit home the, hey, it's cool that you're getting sales, but are you making money? And I think at the end of the day, a lot of people we're all so quick to talk about our revenue numbers, but like, it's really easy to ignore that net income number
Mm-hmm.
and just be like, well, well, one day this will be profitable. But I mean, for me, there's certainly been seasons of life where I'm like, oh, I'd be making so much more if I just had a FANG job or something like that. And that's true a lot of the time. But I do think to have entrepreneurial success, small business owner success, especially, you have to be aggressively pursuing profit-driven activities and ignore things that are not directly contributing to profits. So, Profit First.
Yeah. Okay, so now that um you don't have a job like a W-2.
I have a S corporation that I pay myself a W-2 income from.
Okay.
So I have W-2 income, but it's from a legal entity that I own 100% of
Right.
currently. Yeah.
So what drives you without the pressure of like a boss?
Yeah, it's a good question. Mm. Well, I don't really know where it came from when I was, like in my 20s. I somehow had enough of it to stay alive. But after I got married, I remember kind of having an epiphany as a young married man, and my wife and I combined finances, which I realize not everyone. I realize that doesn't make sense for everyone, but I would recommend it for most situations. But I realized like my wife was essentially signing her paycheck over to me, and of course we combined accounts and everything, and she can do whatever she wants with our money. But I realized that this girl has trusted me to the point of I have a fiduciary responsibility to her. Like it is now my responsibility to make sure that her financial interests are attended to as as well as I possibly can. So that created a lot of motivation in me to learn about everything I can about like finance, investing, taxes, wealth, because I realized that I was no longer just messing around with whatever money I had in my checking account, but now I'm responsible almost for like a financial entity. Like I'm the CFO of my family and my wife is investing in me. And so that created a lot of motivation. I do remember like GameStop has had its like viral meme characteristics a few times.
Mm-hmm.
But the very first time GameStop was GameStop, like the very first meme stock hysteria, I remember like, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm gonna buy some put options on GameStop, and I did, and they paid out a little bit, not nearly enough for the amount of risk that I took, but I was like kind of in the habit of like making bets that I should, it's just straight gambling, and then I remember like making a couple of those bets and then not going my way and feeling all down about it, and it just kind of hit me like I am acting like a juvenile. I'm gambling. This is gambling. Like this is not investing. This is gambling, and I'm no longer only responsible for myself. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my wife. So that has kind of created a lot of motivation in me to just educate myself as much as I possibly can about the nature of finance, investing, wealth, and taxes. And so that's one of the things that I have found a tremendous amount of motivation in, is that you're responsible perhaps for more people than yourself. And I think, I don't have kids, but I'd imagine if you have kids, that effect is 10x, where it's just like, hey, there's more mouths to feed and play here. There are other people whose interests you are responsible for. There's But at the end of the day, I wake up at 5 a.m. I read every morning. I study. I work through educational courses just on my own time. At the end of the day, I just do it because it feels good. It's when I feel like I feel like I'm my best self when I'm learning, studying, achieving. It just feels like, oh, this is where I should be. And so I think the motivation, while it initially kind of did have some prompts, did have some, hey, it's time to grow up concepts. Currently, it's just like, it's what feels good. I don't. I've been going down this. I've been going down what I would consider to be like a highly motivated path for several years. I actually had an experience where I'm sure you're familiar with Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jordan Peterson, one of the books he highly recommends is Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago.
Mm-hmm.
You familiar? Have you read it?
I have not gotten through it. He has a little book that's called A Day in the Life of...
Russian name.
Yeah, something Yevgenovich. I can't remember it. But I have not read the whole Gulag Archipelago.
So I was reading Gulag Archipelago, and one of the things Solzhenitsyn refers to is the tenor, right? Tenner, i.e. a 10-year sentence in the Gulag. And, so the tenor was, and the key takeaway from, or one of Solzhenitsyn's comments was, generally if you got a 10-year sentence in a Gulag, you didn't deserve it. It was just kind of like you were a political prisoner. A neighbor ratted on you before you could rat on them, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Just dark humanity stuff. But Solzhenitsyn kind of describes it as like the 10-year sentence, while devastating and horrible, was ultimately doable, right? You could do 10 years in a gulag and come out the other side reasonably okay, perhaps even improved, And I remember reading that and thinking to myself, like, all right, if these guys could do 10 years in a Siberian gulag, then I should just bust my ass for 10 years and see what happens. Just see what the results are. Just wake up early every day, study, just try to maximize every moment I got for 10 years and just see what happens for 10 years. And currently on year 6, but, and it involved me, like, I, just kind of when I had that moment, it was like, all right, done drinking, no more partying, no more substance abuse, like, nothing crazy, but I haven't drank since I kind of made that choice. And, and I noticed that was a major productivity inhibitor for me. So, cut that out and just tried to start living my life of, is this actually bringing me closer to the accomplishments that I envision, or is this just me being, hedonistic or catering to my own emotions? And I did find that the concept of, well, you could just do 10 years and see what happens, it is inspiring for me too. So I am motivated too by the fact that I do view myself as on a 10-year experiment of just seeing what you could accomplish in life over the course of 10 years.
Have you gotten into Stoicism at all?
Yeah. I've definitely, I've read Ryan Holiday's book. I've listened to some podcasts. I've read Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. So I do like the concepts in general. Yeah.
That just, when you talked about the emotional, not catering to your emotions, I really like how you said that.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. And a thing with Stoicism that I've noticed when I bring it up with people who have not really gotten into it is that it's often like, oh, I'm going to be unemotional now.
Yeah.
Which isn't the case. It isn't saying don't have emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just saying don't blindly follow them.
Yeah.
Like I feel like emotions are a good, they're a good like heuristic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, this is a hint that something is off,
mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean you have to follow it.
Yeah.
Like you have this whole layer of cognition built on top of it that you can use to actually make your decisions.
Yeah. It's a piece of information that you can use in decision making, but it need not be the decision itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and then drinking. We've talked about this on the podcast, but
yeah.
I kind of similar, like a little over a year ago, I just decided to be done.
Yeah.
And it was just like a once a week or once every other week or once a month, I would just go out with friends and just drink more than I needed to.
Yeah.
It's like I would have, to the point where I had a hangover the next day. I felt like all my progress just came to a halt.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And it's such like a lifestyle hack if you can just step away from it.
I honestly feel like it's a superpower in the modern world.
Yeah.
Just to not have those hungover days, to not, financially, right? Like, just not drinking, you will experience financial gain just from that alone.
Yeah, from that day.
Productivity gain, huge. I mean, there are so many times in life where I will look around and kind of evaluate my competition and be like, yeah, but I don't drink. So, like, I probably fire that much faster.
Yeah.
Like, I'm probably that much more prepped for this. Just by simple fact of they probably were at happy hour yesterday. I wasn't. I do think it's an effective superpower in the modern world.
100%.
Did you find so approximately a year ago when you quit drinking, did you find that changed your social relationships?
Somewhat. I think there are definitely like friends who, those moments are when you like really like connect with them, which I'm not sure if you really connect or if it's just like a kind of pseudo connection because you both are wasted.
Mm-hmm.
So it does change the nature of that. And then it also, in a good way, it pushed me to seek more community and social connection elsewhere.
Yeah.
Without the use of alcohol, which then led me to people that I feel more connected with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I found quitting drinking totally changed my social makeup, generally for the better. But there's certain relationships that I think just won't be sustained without that kind of like, I love you, man, connection. You know?
Yeah.
And but it does. Like, I have found that a lot of my most valuable relationships currently are found through fitness, because I think fitness is a routine activity that you generally will develop. If you see the same person in the gym every morning, you're going to just start to develop a trust for that person,
Mm-hmm.
or a respect for that person, because you're going to be like, well, at least he's got his life going on well enough that he hits the gym. You know, being alcohol free for me has become what I view as my key advantage. And at the same token, I do view even though I, had a degree of entrepreneurial success, I limited myself tremendously simply by, wasting too much time and money and effort in just a hungover state. It wasn't even like, it wasn't even like it was, oh, you got a problem, you need to stop, bro. It was just like, dude, I'm wasting my Saturdays and Sundays by not using that time effectively. I'm limiting myself with this very normal activity, which is drinking.
Yeah. Let's talk about health and fitness. So
Okay.
what role does that play in your life?
I'd say a pretty major role. It's a daily pursuit for me that is an opportunity to optimize your experience. We are, existentially, I view myself as a mind in almost like a mind that currently occupies a physical being, so the physical vehicle, and I want that vehicle to be as effective and efficient and as capable as I possibly can. So it plays a major role, and it's something where I view the most fundamental habits, I think, are generally going to be built around fitness because they're readily applicable. They're generally understood. It's whether or not it's controlling your diet or lifting weights or just being active, I think it's something that everyone has the opportunity to improve themselves starting, today with health and fitness. To from wherever you're at, you can always just take that one step further.
Mm-hmm.
And and it also, I mean, going back to finance, I view health and fitness as like actually critical to finance and investing, because given the time value of money, theoretically your most profitable years, your years that your net worth should go up the largest in absolute dollar terms, should be the last years of your life, right? Mm-hmm. Like I saw a stat the other day that like Warren Buffett, I forget the exact stat, but it's like he's worth 96 billion, 93 billion of that came after age like 68 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's basically because he lived such a healthy life, largely speaking, he has achieved huge amounts of wealth, because where the time value of money really goes off the charts is logically going to be at the end of your life. As long as you hit a critical mass of wealth such that your own personal needs, once you're past your earning years, well, you've surpassed that, which I would view in today's dollars. I'd probably put that line somewhere around like 2 to 2.5 million, maybe a little lower. But like I kind of feel like once you hit that level of wealth, you're good. I mean, you're not going to buy a yacht or anything, but you can sustain yourself.
Right.
So like assuming you hit that level of wealth, that combined with health and wellness will yield significant wealth later on in life. So I view fitness as actually one of the most profitable activities you can undertake, in that longevity is one of the key drivers of wealth.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because you're like extending that time for your
Yeah.
money to grow.
Yeah, like imagine just adding another 30 years to your life.
Yeah.
If you're starting those 30 years, so, let's say you're 65, you could have lived an unhealthy life. Maybe you're smoking and drinking or whatever might cut those years short. Well, you're not gonna experience what Warren Buffett experienced. And so even if you're starting that like last 30-year chapter of your life, if you even get to that with, let's say, $2 million, well, that's gonna be, you're good to draw down some of that for your living expenses, but there's no reason to not expect that could be worth 8 to 10 million if you make it to 90.
Yeah.
So I view fitness as like one of those financial contributors ultimately to a wealthy life. And so
Yeah.
but then again, you don't necessarily want to be doing high risk fitness activity. And obviously there's many other factors that come into longevity, but the factors that are within our control, I think the impetus is on the owner of the body to optimize those factors.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's just like your vitality, like what you were saying with drinking is like,
Yeah.
if you are healthy and maintaining your body and keeping it healthy, then you are going to be able to produce more and make
Absolutely.
more money.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, the difference is night and day. Like, I mean, before I quit drinking, I was like reasonably smart, and I was very functional, but now I look at it as like things that seemed hard for me at the time are now easy. I mean, I view it as an effective superpower. Just you're able to focus on higher level pursuits that are generally going to be higher leverage activity that will derive more financial well-being if that's your goal, or whatever else it may be. I mean, a big part of honestly, the biggest difference, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but one of the big differences I remember from before quitting drinking and after quitting drinking is found myself able to like have fun just kind of doing more kid style stuff, like a bit. Almost just you almost like reacquire a spirit of youth,
Mm-hmm.
and you can just have fun in ways that I think it would have been like, are they going to be serving beer at that event? Then I'm out. No, I don't want to go to that. I like, yeah, you don't have to live in this like, oh, that's great, but will there be wine? Like, you don't have to like fall into that trap. You can kind of just be like, oh, that's probably pretty cool. I want to see that. Like, like I felt myself reacquiring some of the youthful fun lovingness that I felt like somewhat slipped away when your entire, are we working? No, then where are we drinking?
Yeah. You're almost like training your brain of how to have fun.
Yeah.
It's like you need this chemical
Yeah.
because that automatically makes things fun. And then when you don't have it, okay, we're not having fun.
Yeah. Is like, where's the happy hour at? Instead of, hey, let's just go see something cool.
Yeah.
So, I think you literally quitting drinking literally brought me back to a more youthful state, which along the lines of longevity contributes to long-term financial well-being given the time value of money. It's, I mean, a financially competent 90-year-old life is, 99 times out of 100 is going to be better off than a 65-year-old life, just because you just have that much more time for wealth to grow in a capitalistic system.
Yeah. When have you failed in the past, and how did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that I could jump on myself for. I think one of the key failures that I experienced was uh, I I had built a business and it was reasonably successful, paying salaries, and I wanted to make that business kind of more sexy, So it's like I wanted to pivot into products that really there weren't demand for, and it was really just for ego moves. So it's like, oh, we're a tech company, kind of activity, and you find yourself like gravitating towards trends and towards buzzwords, and so I think that has resulted in some failures, and uh, again, kind of getting away from the idea of like this needs to be profitable to this needs to be something I'm pumped to talk about at happy hour. Like I'm gonna be excited when what do you do? Oh yeah, I trade Bitcoin futures or something like that. Like you're gonna feel real cool saying it, but it's like yeah, but you're probably not actually doing anything that's leaving it that much money left over at the end of the day. So I've definitely fallen into that trap where I've pivoted into products and businesses that I did so not necessarily because of believing in the economics or believing in the market, but really I just wanted to get that social perception of like, oh yeah, I work in finance or something like that, just some. So there have been some instances like that, like I remember one time thinking like, oh, I'm gonna build a peer-to-peer marketplace in an agricultural niche, and went through some like ham-fisted software development efforts to build that peer-to-peer marketplace. Kind of like I don't know which ones are still around, but like eBay would be an obvious one, but like the idea of that all these there was a time I think where like oh every niche is gonna have their eBay system, and so I would try to build those and kind of realized in short order that yeah, nobody wants to use this, and it's actually quite hard because you need network events, you need network effects, and you need to hit a critical mass of users. So uh peer-to-peer marketplaces are something that I've found myself failing in because I've just ignored the economics and wanted to be the sexy tech entrepreneur. So yeah, there's some failure points. Yeah, that was long ago. In a more recent time, things that I've failed in, I guess, I mean, there's a lot less things that like really hang over my head since I honestly am like not drinking. Like, there's a lot less like just like general regret of making poor decisions. I will say that like I've it took me too long to learn to invest properly. It took me too long to like actually learn the economic realities of the way our capitalistic country works. And so I've done a lot of trading that I now look back on and I'm like, ah, that was so dumb. That's just straight up gambling. You should have just gone to Vegas. You should have just gone to a blackjack table because at least a blackjack table is going to be much faster. But like, I've got caught up in like Robinhood and options and things like that. It's funny because like, I wanted to learn to invest, but I remember being like, well, clearly I'm a smart guy, so I should start with options, right? Like, I don't need to learn the grandma style investing. I don't need to actually learn the way money works. I can get started with, complex Wall Street style arbitrage. And oh, and then there's content out there that'll be like, yeah, you too can make huge returns, 40% a year doing complex Wall Street style arbitrage. And it's, and before you understand the economic realities of the way money works, it's really easy to convince yourself of like, well, I'm a smart guy, so I should be able to do that, right? But yeah, so I've definitely jumbled up some things there, but ultimately those are failures that I think are important to have because it teaches you the difference between like gambling and investing or speculating and investing, and so I'm thankful that I had those experiences because I feel like now I'm in a place where I can deploy capital far more effectively and actually can handle the wealth that comes into my life and use it to generate more wealth rather than constantly being like, well, what's the next bet I'm gonna make? So I mean, they're just doing stuff I didn't understand, like trading the VIX, for example, like trading, trying to trade trade on stock volatility, buying options on stock volatility, and it's like, you watch like The Big Short or something like that, and you're like, oh, I can do that too, and you don't really realize that you're viewing an extreme, you're viewing a Hollywood story of an extreme outlier.
Yeah.
And it's in no way reliable. And, even if you were able to take that amount of risk, you probably wouldn't even be making enough to justify the amount of risk you're taking. Like, I remember one time I bought like gold futures. I was like, oh, gold, during COVID, everyone's going to flee to gold. Like, I was listening to like dumb podcasts and stuff like that. I was like, oh, gold futures. And I remember like it went my way. Like the stock price, like, it's like maybe I bought a call option at 21, or but let's say the index was at 21 and I bought a call option and that index went up to 27, right? It's like, oh, big home run. Like I should be rolling. Let's should be like 10x. And then at the end of the day, it's like, actually you only made like 40% on that. And you took on a huge amount of risk because like you don't truly understand all the financial mechanisms. Now there are people out there that perhaps do, but I don't necessarily think that it's far easier to convince yourself that you're the guy and lie to yourself rather than just be like, hey, I'm probably not the guy, so maybe I should just understand the financial realities of the way this works so that I can deploy capital effectively. So definitely got myself cross with doing dumb stuff on Robinhood before. So trend. So I guess the general failures I would throw into the boat of trend chasing, being more focused on image rather than financial returns, and getting into complex situations that I don't understand at all, and worse yet, refuse to admit I don't understand and I'm unwilling to learn about. So those are the key points of failure I've experienced.
Yeah. I went through the same kind of Robinhood, and this was when I was like, luckily it was when I was in college.
Yeah.
So I didn't have much money to play with.
Yeah.
But it was totally gambling.
Yeah, it's straight up gambling. It's straight up gambling. Yeah. And I think it needs to be treated as such. Like, I think as a young man, I know for me personally, like, I have a gambling itch. Like, I know that there's a part of me that finds a certain amount of pleasure and enjoyment in taking financial risk. And that can be exploited, like, and I think it's very hard to scratch that gambling itch and just like, hey, let's have a poker night. Like, let's have a poker night and we'll all pitch in $20. Okay, that's fine. That's like entertainment level. That's scratching the itch without it having devastating consequences. Yeah. Are you playing 9 hands of online poker at once? And like, yeah, that's a problem, dude. That's straight up gambling. Like, you're not the guy. Like, you're not, like, this isn't gonna work out. Yep. And I think that we, especially as young men, we can potentially be exploited on that, and it's something we got to watch out for. So now I kind of look for like, how can I scratch the gambling itch without actually like speculating or doing something stupid? And I think fantasy football with your friends is actually a great way to do that, because it's like a 4-month-long poker game for whatever your buy-in is, but maybe 20, 40, $50. Mm-hmm. So like I think if you acknowledge you have that propensity to have that gambler itch, you need to find ways to scratch that itch without it being financially devastating. And I think the Robinhood meme stock thing, or you go on Wall Street Bets and you just see so many cases of people that are being exploited. They're making their choices. I'm not saying that like government should step in or anything like that, but you just wish that there was more education out there to like help people understand, hey, this isn't going to work out well for you.
Yeah. What is something you are struggling with right now?
I'm in a personal like financial situation where I view myself as being able to pursue one of two routes. I can go for high upside, high risk, high upside, or more certain, wealth generation, but at the end of the day, probably just, not just, nice wealth, but at the same time, nothing outstanding. So I kind of view it as the difference between lifestyle entrepreneurship and growth entrepreneurship. Like, are you looking for something that could potentially be venture backed or venture scale, something that can potentially like bring in outside investors and then scale to the point of having a path to 100 million in revenue and potentially even hitting an IPO and going through kind of the traditional high growth, generally high tech startup route? Or do you just want to start a lifestyle business that maybe is going to be, very attractive? Perhaps you can make $200,000 to $400,000 a year working, you know, 40 hours a week tops. Like, there are ways to do that I think are available to most people of, reasonable abilities. So I'm kind of in a position right now of, do I want to take the lifestyle path or the high growth path? Historically, I've generally been on the more lifestyle path. Like digital nomadship is generally going to be more of a lifestyle call. And it's been good to me, but I am in a situation where I do wonder, all right, is it time to pull the trigger on the growth path? Is it time to like really go for that upside?
Mm-hmm.
Or should I just be happy with the lifestyle route? So to me, it's a question of ambition. It's a question of risk. It's a question of, self-actualization. Like for me personally, like a dream, I mean, sometimes I have, just mental visions and personal dreams about like, oh, having an IPO, like that would be like climbing the mountain. That would be the top. That would be the best of the best. That would be like full actualization. You've created an economic entity so investable and so sustainable that is now a publicly traded entity. Like I view that as like just such a massive contribution to the general state of human economic activity that, I'd love to be there someday, but I realize the probability is next to nothing, and it is a long and stressful path. And you might balance that with something like, lifestyle opportunities out there where, I mean, there are things that I think people of reasonable intelligence can insert themselves into various niches. And then, I mean, you could work, for example, tax prep, right? Learning to do tax preparation and offering tax prep services. You can work, the first 4 months of the year and make six figures doing that and kind of just live your life however you want for the rest of the year. Like that's a very possible, very feasible route. And especially as you get a little older and you have like more experience and more network and more connections, like that's a totally doable thing. I think for anyone that'd be willing to, and you need to have a reasonable mathematic and it's not like anyone could do that, but anyone that's going to be, have certain level of opportunity available to them based on, general mental acumen could go that route. And I think there's a handful of, there's many very, very nice lifestyle entrepreneurial paths you can go down. So I'm kind of in a position right now where it's like, keep going down the lifestyle route, or perhaps it's time to pull the trigger on more of a growth route.
What is the risk of the growth route?
The risk of the growth route, I think, is that you waste a lot of time. I mean, you might devote the next 10 years to an endeavor that you have nothing to show for at the end of it. You've taken on crippling stress. You've let your health slip. You've soured relationships. You've became a worse version of yourself in pursuit of a goal that has a very low probability of coming to pass. So I obviously time, but I think there's a lot more at risk. You might not like the person you become by trying to pursue such an aggressive goal. Well, so I think about stress. Like I've had employees before, I've had payroll before. Like it's a little harder to sleep when you got payroll coming up. It's just like these things have their costs.
Mm-hmm.
These things have their little taxes on them, and dealing with all the ins and outs of a high growth startup. I would imagine if you I don't care what the context is, but if you take a round of funding from an investment group, you now have people that they're going to scrutinize your every move. And that's not like, I mean, if you embrace it, perhaps it's going to make you be your best self. But I imagine that'd make it a lot harder to sleep. So
Yeah, that's like the whole family thing you were talking about earlier.
yeah,
Like how you're not responsible for someone else, but it's like a bunch of people.
yeah. So like maybe lifestyle focused entrepreneurship and current in the current United States is pretty solid overall. Like I mean, imagine making six figures and traveling 6 months a year. It's like it's totally doable. And that's pretty attractive. It's
Yeah.
like hard to say. Oh, so I want to hit an IPO one day, so I'm going to turn that down. You know, so yeah, I do struggle with the should you is a life well lived a successful small business owner or that person that just makes the maximum impact in an economic context. So hoping to answer that question over the next couple months, uh, but who knows.
What does your dream life look like?
Dream life for me, I mean, honestly, I don't know specifically where it would be that much different than the life I currently live, which perhaps is a like cheesy and cliche way to answer that. But yeah, I mean, I am generally pretty happy and satisfied with the way things are for me currently. So there are certain things I wouldn't want to lose. Like for example, I wouldn't want to lose the general like drive and focus that causes me to read every day. Like that to me is like just one of those things that I like the most about myself. Um, so a dream life, I guess, would be a state of complete autonomy where everything I choose to work on is by choice and because I believe in the economic viability of what I'm working on rather than doing something because somebody else wants me to do it. So I guess it would be a state of pure autonomy if that's possible. But it by no means would be like, oh, I'm chilling on a beach. Like I lived in Mexico. I've been to like every beach in Mexico. And every beach you'd see people that had moved there, especially like retirees, and did not necessarily seem very thrilled with their choice. Like you could just see that there was a challenge missing, there was a purpose missing, and that the whole like, oh, I'm just gonna spend the rest of my days lying on a beach, that's gonna get old in like 2 weeks. Like I just don't think that's a reasonable. That's not a reasonable goal. It's just not something that just go spend 2 weeks on a beach and I promise you'll be ready to come back or like ready to do something else with your time. But for me, I guess it would just be a state of complete autonomy, a state of waking up and knowing, hey, what I'm going to work on today is I'm working on something that is purely because I believe in it. There's no piece of this that is me just meeting expectations or doing what somebody else wants me to do. It'd be a state of like, this is what I want to work on and I'm doing exactly that. I guess work because you want to rather than because you have to, but that's generally going to just be financial independence. But I think what I'm describing is a little more than that, where it's a true self-direction while still being physically and mentally capable of functioning at a high performance. So how much like true work autonomy do I have today? I'd probably put that number around like, I don't know, 40 to 60%. So like I've generally lived my life in a way that favors autonomy, but like anyone else, I get emails that I need to respond to, and like people write me checks, and if I don't respond to their emails, they're not gonna be happy. So it's like we all have that expectation to perform for others, and I think being totally free of that expectation while still young, or I should say youthful, uh, capable, you know, effective enough to use that time wisely and effectively. That would be my dream. A state of autonomy before the decline.
Austin Johnson. Austin, where can people find out more about you?
Twitter, X, Austin AI, LinkedIn, Austin AI. Those are the best spots. I do like to tweet. My tweets are generally going to be more of my thoughts that I want to record internally, but I do find that I enjoy when other people see them. So Twitter, Austin AI.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was fun.
All right. Bye, everybody.